Episode 16 of Seducing Drake Palma arrives like a slow-burning storm, carrying with it emotional pressure that has been building quietly across earlier chapters. Rather than relying on overt drama, this episode leans into psychological tension, allowing silence, hesitation, and unspoken motives to speak louder than confrontations. It feels like a turning point where restraint finally begins to crack. The episode opens in a subdued atmosphere, immediately signaling that something within Drake has shifted. His composure, once rigid and controlled, now carries visible strain. The writing carefully presents this change not through exposition but through behavior, letting the audience feel the weight of internal conflict rather than being told about it. Drake's emotional distance, which once felt calculated and intentional, now appears defensive. Episode 16 reframes his aloofness as a shield rather than a weapon. This subtle repositioning of his character is one of the episode's strongest achievements, deepening him beyond the archetype of an untouchable male lead. The protagonist's presence in this episode is quieter but more powerful. She no longer pushes or provokes in obvious ways. Instead, her restraint becomes her strategy. The shift in her approach suggests growth, signaling that seduction in this story has evolved from pursuit into emotional endurance. There is a noticeable change in the power balance between the two leads. Where Drake once held emotional authority, the episode slowly hands that control to the protagonist. She no longer chases his attention, instead, she allows space, forcing Drake to confront the silence he once depended on. Dialogue in this episode is sparse, but every line feels intentional. Conversations are layered with double meanings, where what is not said carries more weight than spoken words. The writers trust the audience enough to read between the lines, and that trust pays off. One of the most compelling aspects of episode 16 is its use of pacing. Scenes linger longer than expected, allowing discomfort to settle in. This deliberate slowness mirrors the emotional paralysis both characters are experiencing, creating a sense of realism that makes the tension more visceral. Drake's internal struggle becomes increasingly apparent through his reactions to minor interactions. A glance held too long, a pause before responding, a moment of visible irritation at his own vulnerability. These details build a portrait of a man losing control over emotions he believed he had mastered. The episode also explores pride as a destructive force. Drake's reluctance to admit his feelings is no longer portrayed as strength but as self-sabotage. This thematic shift reframes earlier episodes, encouraging viewers to reconsider past moments through a more critical lens. The protagonist's emotional intelligence stands out strongly here. She recognizes Drake's turmoil without naming it outright. Instead of demanding clarity, she offers presence, allowing him the space to unravel on his own terms. This restraint elevates her character significantly. There is an underlying sadness throughout the episode that never fully surfaces but remains palpable. It comes from the understanding that both characters want the same thing but are trapped by different fears. This emotional symmetry adds depth to their dynamic. Supporting characters play a quieter yet meaningful role in episode 16. Their interactions subtly reflect the central conflict, acting as mirrors that highlight Drake's emotional isolation and the protagonist's growing self-awareness. The episode makes excellent use of physical space. Rooms feel larger, distances between characters more pronounced. Even when Drake and the protagonist share a scene, there is a sense of separation that emphasizes emotional distance rather than closeness. Drake's moments alone are particularly striking. The absence of dialogue in these scenes allows the audience to sit with his discomfort. His stillness feels heavy, charged with thoughts he refuses to articulate. The protagonist's internal growth becomes clearer through her choices rather than her words. She no longer compromises her dignity for reassurance. This evolution adds maturity to the narrative and prevents the romance from feeling one-sided or unhealthy. Episode 16 subtly questions the concept of seduction itself. It suggests that true intimacy cannot be forced or manipulated, only allowed. This thematic pivot adds philosophical weight to the series and sets it apart from more superficial romance narratives. The emotional tension reaches its peak not through confrontation but through near confession. Moments where Drake almost speaks his truth but stops short are agonizing in their restraint, making the silence louder than any argument could be. The episode's atmosphere feels heavier than previous installments, as if the story itself is holding its breath. This sensation creates a compelling sense of anticipation for what lies ahead. Drake's fear of vulnerability is portrayed with nuance rather than judgment. The narrative does not excuse his behavior but seeks to explain it, allowing viewers to empathize without absolving him. The protagonist's patience, however, is no longer endless. Episode 16 introduces the idea that emotional understanding does not require self-sacrifice. This boundary setting adds realism and strength to her character. There is a notable lack of resolution in this episode, and that is its greatest strength. Instead of tying emotional threads neatly, it allows them to remain tangled, reflecting the messy nature of real emotional growth. The writing avoids melodrama, opting instead for emotional honesty. Even moments that could have become dramatic are grounded in subtle gestures and restrained reactions. Episode 16 also deepens the theme of control versus surrender. Drake's struggle is not just about love but about relinquishing control over his carefully constructed identity. The protagonist's silence becomes a form of communication in itself. By choosing not to push, she forces Drake to confront the consequences of his emotional avoidance. Visually and tonally, the episode feels more intimate, as if the story is narrowing its focus to the emotional core of its leads. Distractions fall away, leaving only unresolved tension. The emotional payoff is delayed, but the groundwork laid here is undeniable. Episode 16 feels like the calm before an emotional reckoning rather than a climax in itself. Drake's character arc takes a decisive turn here. While he does not fully change, the cracks in his armor are now impossible to ignore, signaling inevitable transformation. The protagonist emerges as the emotional anchor of the story. Her strength lies not in control but in clarity, a contrast that reshapes the dynamic between them. This episode rewards attentive viewers. Small callbacks to earlier moments gain new significance, suggesting careful long-term storytelling rather than episodic writing. The tension between hope and resignation defines the emotional tone. Both characters sense that something must change, but neither is certain how to initiate that change without loss. Episode 16 resists the temptation to offer easy satisfaction. Instead, it trusts emotional complexity, allowing discomfort to exist without immediate relief. The silence at the end of the episode feels intentional, almost symbolic. It leaves the audience suspended in uncertainty, mirroring the character's emotional state. In many ways, this episode serves as an emotional thesis for the series. It clarifies what Seducing Drake Palma is truly about, not conquest, but vulnerability. The restrained intensity of episode 16 makes it one of the most emotionally resonant chapters so far. It does not shout its importance, but it lingers long after it ends. Ultimately, episode 16 stands as a quiet yet powerful turning point. It deepens character psychology, challenges romantic tropes, and prepares the narrative for a more honest, emotionally charged progression ahead.